Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. My name's Daniel, and I'm so glad that all of you are here today. Today marks the end, the very last book that I'll be doing a book review of in C.S. Lewis's signature classic box set collection. This has been a wild ride, and I have absolutely, undoubtedly saved the best book for last. If you haven't been paying any attention, in today's world, we have begun stripping away all objective moral standards. Your feelings have become the root reason and cause for your reality. Whatever you say goes, whatever you feel at the moment is your lived experience. There is no real reason, there is no objective truth. Everything is simply a hazy blur at which your reality can be stretched and changed at your whim. But C.S. Lewis confronts all of that in this incredible, fantastic book, The Abolition of Man. As always, I'm not going to be reading this book to you, which is why I implore you to go down in the description, follow that link, and grab a copy for yourself, because this could very well be the most important book of our generation. Yes, it was written almost 100 years ago, but every sentence written in this book applies directly to what we see happening in society today. So in today's episode, I'm going to be doing this brief overview, going into the history of the book and talking about each of the three parts of the abolition of man. Let's get down to it. So one day, C.S. Lewis received in his mail a package, and that package contained what he calls the Green Book, because C.S. Lewis was kind enough to keep the authors of this book and the name of this book anonymous. But if you Google it, you can find out exactly who wrote this book and what book it was. And this book was a literature book. This book was being used to teach children about the English language and about literature. And C.S. Lewis found that what was written in this book was extremely disturbing and upsetting. And so C.S. Lewis went on to write 3 lectures about the ideas in this Green Book and went on to give these lectures to students at campuses and elsewhere. And those lectures became The Abolition of Man. So The Abolition of Man is a book in defense of universal values. And whenever C.S. Lewis is referring to these universal values, he uses the term the Tao. He specifically leaves out Christianity because he wants to try to get people's attention in a way that doesn't bring religion into the situation. He's trying to create a defense for all universal values that doesn't involve religion, because he wants to say, listen, we have great reason, no matter what you believe in. You don't have to believe in Christianity to see how important it is to understand that there are universal moral goods, that there are universal moral bads, and you simply cannot go around creating whatever values you please. He creates a defense against relativism and says, listen, no matter what you believe in, no matter what religion you follow, no matter where you're from, we can clearly see there are universal values and there is good reason to follow those values. And that defense for objective moral truths, objective moral values, became these 3 speeches, which became this absolutely beautifully incredible book, The Abolition of Man. So this book starts out with part 1, titled Men Without Chests. Now, people have greatly misunderstood what C.S. Lewis means by men without chests. People believe that men without chests mean unmanly men, men that aren't as robust as other strong men. But what C.S. Lewis means is men without virtue. He refers to the chest as your virtuousness. And so when people make all these arguments against C.S. Lewis and call him a misogynist for using these terms, they're completely missing the point, because what C.S. Lewis is actually saying is that men are abandoning their virtues. So the book starts out talking about the Green Book. There are 2 authors, and he's talking about the 2 authors of this literature book, And he talks about how these two authors are replacing universal moral values with relativism. And they're doing this by changing the way we see the English language. C.S. Lewis addresses this by discussing a passage in the literature book about a waterfall. The two authors of the Green Book bring up a passage about a waterfall, and in describing the waterfall, use only human emotion, as if the waterfall has no intrinsic value or beauty. And it's such a simple, nuanced thing that somebody reading a literature book could easily pass up and not recognize, but C.S. Lewis makes a huge deal about it. The reason that he makes such a big deal about it is because these authors are pretty much abandoning the idea that anything could have intrinsic value. Intrinsic means that the object holds the value itself. It means that I don't assign value to it. It means that the person next to you doesn't assign value to it. It simply has value. Beauty is one of these intrinsic values that we can all recognize. And we see day after day that this is one of these intrinsic values that is being destroyed. Beauty has become subjective. It doesn't mean anything anymore because everybody's beautiful, regardless as to whether or not they really are. Everything is beautiful, even though it's not. Because without intrinsic value, you can simply assign these values to whatever you choose to, and you're not relying on any objective standard. While it seems petty to jump on these two authors about the way they describe a waterfall, the reason C.S. Lewis does this is because they're replacing objective moral values with feelings. If you're paying any attention to the world around you, that is one of the major problems that we see in society today. Instead of there being any standard, there are simply the way that people feel. We're talking about people's lived experiences, people's own truths. Truth has become something that we can create on a whim, when in reality, truth is something that is there whether you believe it or not. Truth cannot be changed because truth simply is. So I completely understand C.S. Lewis's reaction when he sees these two people writing a book that will teach children about the English language. And he sees that they're teaching children that there are no intrinsic values, that there are no objective moral standards. There's only what you currently feel at the moment. Part 2 in the Abolition of Man is titled The Way, and it's all about the idea of relativism and the idea of progress. And it is C.S. Lewis creating a defense, an argument against relativism, and he starts out very strong. He says that relativism is self-defeating because whenever you say that there can be no objective moral value, you're creating a value statement. So in order for relativism to make any claim about reality, it must abandon its relativistic ideas in order to do so. In order to definitively say that there are no objective standards, you must be abiding by an objective standard. C.S. Lewis goes on to talk about how the two authors of the Green Book seem to be indicating that you can believe whatever you want and there are no objective moral truths, but they also begin to push their own truths. And he begins to question, if you don't believe in objective moral truths, how can you push your own truths? And then he begins to talk about progress for the sake of progress. It seems as though the two authors and culture along with it care an awful lot about progress, but progress towards what? We very may well be progressing towards the edge of a cliff, but at least it's progress. So if the two authors of the Green Book are trying to destroy traditional moral values, what are they destroying traditional moral values for? What do they intend to replace these values with? And how did they come to the conclusion that their values were more important than traditional moral values? One phrase used to describe relativism is standing securely in mid-air. If that makes any sense to you, Feel free to explain that in the comments below, because it is an absolutely absurd statement, but accurately reflects the ideology of relativism. C.S. Lewis goes on to describe how humans all have instincts that don't necessarily reflect reason. And C.S. Lewis describes how difficult it is for science and reason to create an ought statement. Science and reason can tell us what is and what is not, but science and reason cannot tell you what you should or should not do. C.S. Lewis argues that there are objective moral standards and that it will not be found through the test tube of science or through the philosophy of reason, but they are found within human instinct itself. Instinct will encourage a man to go fight for his country, but using science and reason can hardly give a man a reason to fight for his country and die. So to summarize part 2 of The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis is saying that science and reason do not create ought statements. They do not lead us to values, but values are something that we find instinctually within humanity. Part 3 of The Abolition of Man is titled The Abolition of Man, and he talks about if we continue to progress for the sake of progress, what will that ultimately lead us to? And he says that will ultimately lead to the abolition of man. He talks about how man believes that he is conquering nature one step at a time, but never does man truly conquer nature. Man is constantly submitting to nature. He uses the example of aerodynamics, the aerodynamics of an airplane. Airplanes seemingly conquered natural laws, but in reality, man had to submit to the laws of physics. He had to submit to the laws of aerodynamics in order to create the aerodynamics and the propulsion, the forward movement of the plane that would actually create lift. When man creates the airplane and flies, he is not defeating gravity. No, he is using nature itself to overcome gravity. C.S. Lewis goes on and uses a multitude of examples that we can find in modern day society and shows how things that seem to be man conquering nature tend to actually be man conquering man. He really goes thick into the weeds on this one. He talks about contraception, and he goes and talks about how it seems as though we're deciding our own fate when we use contraception, but truly we're deciding the fate of the next generation by deciding who will and who will not be born into this world. I found this to be incredibly deep, and he said this in a way that really took me by surprise. I've never heard an argument like this made before, and so I was truly shocked to see the way that C.S. Lewis talked about our progress for the sake of progress. So really the summation of this book, The Abolition of Man, is to say that if we abandon traditional moral values, the Tao, as C.S. Lewis puts it in this book, if we say that there are no objective moral goods, there is no true right and no true wrong, if we seek progress for the sake of progress, that we will be progressing towards the edge of a cliff and we will ultimately be destroying mankind. We will be creating a society of men and women without virtue, that is, without chests, and we will ultimately be replacing virtue with vice. And if you've been paying any attention, you can see that that is already the product of society's beliefs. Society stands in midair of relativism, saying that there is no true good, there is no true bad, everything is about the way that I personally feel in this moment. And you can see the results of that playing out in real time. C.S. Lewis may have written this book almost 100 years ago. He's written this book, created his legacy, passed on to the next life. He's gone. But this book still remains, and it is as true today as it was back then. I am so surprised at how applicable this book is to you and I, how important it is to believe in intrinsic values, how important it is to believe in objective moral truths, and how that remains to be the foundation of a functioning, healthy society. If you've seen some of my other C.S. Lewis videos, you know how much I love this book because I won't shut up about it. This is by far one of my favorite C.S. Lewis books of all time. I think that it is extremely impactful, and I think that this is the book that we need to be reading. I think this is the book that we need to be talking about and discussing because it is so simple, the ideas expressed in this book. This is an incredibly short book, a very easy read, but the ideas expressed within are impactful and could possibly flip the direction of an entire generation. So yeah, I think this is an incredible book. I think that you should be reading this. I think you should be buying it for a friend. And I think that this is a book that should be in the hands of many more readers. I think I'm getting a little emotional about this, but this is absolutely a must read. I know I've said that so many times about so many books. When it comes down to it, I believe that Mere Christianity and The Abolition of Man are two of C.S. Lewis's most important books. I just finished doing Mere Christianity, and you can follow the link above, but these two books are so fundamental in Christian ideology, so fundamental in what Christians believe, that there are truths, that Christ is the truth. And while he leaves Christianity out of The Abolition of Man, the ideas in this book are still so important and so fundamental to what Christians believe. So that's my soapbox about The Abolition of Man. I've read it a couple years ago, and then I've read it more recently now. I've listened to lots of lectures on this book. I've read articles about this book, and I cannot stress enough how important this book is. So go in the description below, follow the link to it, get yourself a copy, get a copy for a friend, read this book, talk about it in the comments below, and I implore you, read this book and understand a strong defense for objective moral reasonings. Without objective moral reasonings, we only have relativism. We're floating in midair with no proper direction to follow. We're simply going wherever culture will lead us, and it doesn't look like that's going in the greatest direction if you've been paying any attention, as I've said already in this video. So, on a less serious note, I hope that you guys had a great time watching this video. If you did, smash that like button. If you want to see more videos from yours truly, smash that subscribe button. I just finished, finally, the C.S. Lewis Signature Classic box collection. So I need suggestions for more books to do down in the comments below. There are still a ton of C.S. Lewis books to do, and I will be getting on it. But I want to see what you, the viewer, are hoping to see in the future. So let me know down below what books you want to see. And if you have read The Abolition of Man, I would love to get your input on how impactful this book is. Let the other viewers see by your comments how important and fundamentally critical this book is to shaping our culture. Well, like always, I had a great time doing this video. And as always, I hope that you all have an absolutely fantastical, wonderful day. Have a great day, guys.